As I was recently released from the High Council in my stake, and as I've been going back through the Doctrine and Covenants recently and reading about the purpose of the High Council, I've noticed that the changes that have been made to the High Council, especially in the last 3 years, have made it so that the High Council no longer at all resembles the purpose for which the High Council was formed. So in Doctrine and Covenants section 102, it talks about the formation of the High Council. In verse 2, it says that High Councils were formed for the purpose of resolving difficult disputes in the church. This would be like disciplinary councils, those type of things. And so in D&C 102, it talks about bringing people who are who have a dispute with the church, or the church has a dispute with them, before the council. And half of the council, they draw lots, and half the council represents the interest of the accused, the person who is against the church. And then the other half of the council represents the interest of the church. And this is so that the person coming into a council is sure not to be injured unjustly by the church coming before that council. Now, as a stake clerk, that was 2 years ago, and it was for the previous 5 years or so, I was in every stake disciplinary council because I was to take notes. And so I would sit in the back and watch the proceedings. And the stake presidency, the stake president specifically would preside over the disciplinary council and would call that person in before the High Council, and there would be a bit of a hearing for that person, and they would draw lots, but they would only really take lots number 1 and 2, and they would have 2 members of the High Council. One would make sure that the church was represented fairly, and number 2 would make sure that the rights of the user, or the person being brought in, were fairly represented. So the disciplinary council did involve the High Council. However, 5 years ago, the decision was made by the stake president, and the High Council was asked to sustain that decision. And if they didn't, then there would be some discussion on it. In fact, I was in at least one disciplinary council where there was another member of the High Council who raised their hand and said that they could not sustain the actions taken against the person. And so there was some discussion around that until that was finally resolved. In D&C 102, it says actually that the High Council itself is responsible for making that decision. Of that number, it says that one is called to be the president of the council, and that person can have a couple of other members assisting. So there can be 1 to 3 different presidents of that council, but they're within the number of the High Council. So it does not specify in D&C 102 that the stake presidency is supposed to preside over the High Council. That's a newer thing. But back then, 5 years ago, it was closer to what D&C 102 says. Probably 3 years ago, the handbook changed, and High Counselors, the High Council was no longer invited on a normal basis to be part of disciplinary councils. And so the handbook now says that in very limited cases, High Counselors can be, or the High Council can be part of the disciplinary council, but it has removed the responsibility of a portion of the High Council to represent the person being accused and to make sure that no injury or injustice was done. So as far as the normal council these days, it is with the stake president and the councilors in the stake presidency, but that is it. And so the High Council has now been, on normal cases, has been completely removed from settling disputes within the church. And it's pretty much a one-man show with the stake president. So the High Council, its purpose, as stated now in the handbook, is to represent the stake presidency, to be on, it says, in a limited fashion, to be in a disciplinary council, but it's basically not recommended, and then to be on other councils in the stake, and then also to be part of like Young Men's Presidency, that type of a thing, those members. So now the High Council, as they are constituted, are glorified assistants to the stake presidency and the stake president. So the High Council has been eliminated as far as its function is concerned in the church. Now, is that by revelation, and is that okay? You might remember in 3rd Nephi, when the Lord comes and he speaks to the disciples he chooses, he asks if the prophecies of Samuel were written and fulfilled, and specifically he talks about how Samuel had prophesied that at the resurrection of Christ, that there would be those who arose from their graves and were resurrected. And he said, didn't this happen? And they said, yeah. And he said, well, why isn't it written? There are many places in the scriptures that talk about the fact that we are supposed to write down any and all revelation from the Lord, and that it must be written. Joseph said that part of the priesthood is making a record of those things that happen. So we have a record of a revelation, section 102, that talks about the revealed purpose and duties of the High Council. We have that. We do not have a revelation from the Lord written down and given to the church that revokes that. That is concerning. Most of what you read now in the Doctrine and Covenants about the purposes of the church, about the administration of funds, about the organization and the hierarchy of the church, most of that is no longer practiced as appointed by the Lord. And all we have now is a handbook which has not been voted in by common consent from the church, but is changed regularly. High counselors are supposed to be high priests that have a duty to members of the church and to the church, and that are on a regular basis making sure that justice is done. And from what I can see, that has been changed without revelation from the Lord, or at least a written revelation, which I would assume, if the Lord can write the revelation to state the purpose of the High Council, then he can also give a revelation written that people can see that change his stated purposes. If not, I will ask, why does the Lord change his mind about the purpose of the High Council? Why does he set up a High Council that is supposed to prevent injustice to members, and supposed to have 12 members to make sure that disputes are settled in a manner that is fair, just like the apostles talk about them going into council together and them having 12 people there, and they say that there are many disputes there, and that they come to an agreement, a unanimous agreement about what is supposed to be done in the church. Why is that no longer a thing for stakes and for high councils? Why is it a one-man show with the stake president? Why does the high council now not obey its stated purpose? We shouldn't be calling it a high council if it's not really a high council. So read through section 102, and then read through, you can go to the handbook of the church online and read through the purpose of the high council and see if that reflects what's in section 102. And then go look at the disciplinary councils and see what is recommended, and whether or not the rights of the accused are still represented by the high council. They are not. That's been changed, and it's been changed drastically in just the last about 3 years. As a high counselor for 2 years, I was never invited into a disciplinary council, even though I know that disciplinary councils were held at the level of the stake president. But that's very different than it was 5 years ago when I was a state clerk and participated in some membership councils, as they call them, where you would bring people in and you would have a council of the high counselors, 12 members plus the first presidency. At least there was the ability at that point to have a larger group considering the fairness and justice of actions against members of the stake. So, do the scriptures mean what they say? Did God reveal what he revealed, and has he changed that? Or have we changed things for convenience in the church?